want to say this before we get into 2 Kings chapter number 3. I want to put a plug in for our Camp Discovery series. I'm excited about this series. It's not going to be exactly what you think it's going to be. I am going to cover a broad range of subjects. We're going to talk about insurance. We're going to talk about managing your money. We're going to talk about, we're going to talk about a lot of things connected to running your home. And so whether you're a home of one or a home of 7, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, and I'm excited about that. And so I want to encourage other people to be here. We're looking tonight, 2 Kings chapter number 3. Recently, on some of my social media feeds, I've seen these videos of this guy. He's dressed as in disguise. He's wearing a set of coveralls, and he's acting like he's cleaning up at a gym. These guys, they're there with rippling muscles, huge muscles, and they're struggling with these big heavy weights, and it's taking all their brute strength to pick them up. And here's this skinny-looking guy in these coveralls in this disguise, and he's acting like a janitor. And what they're struggling to pick up with 2 hands, he just goes over and it's in his way, and so he just goes and picks it up with 1 hand and sets it over, and their jaws drop because that weight was so heavy for them, and yet it seemed so light for him. And come to find out, this guy is a world champion bodybuilder. Not bodybuilder, but weightlifter. And so he's just doing this kind of as a running gag, and their reaction is priceless because he is lifting so easily what they couldn't. And most of us have faced moments in our life where we had things that were too heavy for us to pick up. Things that we felt were overwhelming, a problem that we looked at that was in front of us, and we realized that problem is bigger than my resources. It's bigger than my strength. I am not able to move this. But I'm so glad that it is but a light thing for God. What is too heavy for us to carry, what is too big for our resources and strength and even our faith, is no problem for God. Imagine having 3 armies out of water, stranded in the wilderness, watching their animals collapse and their soldiers weaken with no solution. That's a big thing, a heavy thing, but I want to say it was but a light thing for God. As Elisha says there in verse number 18, this is but a light thing in the sight of God. What these men, these kings saw as a crisis, Elisha says, oh, with God, that's just light. That's easy. And isn't that, that gives me a lot of hope. Because the problems that I carry, the burdens that I bear, they're but a light thing for God. They may be big for me, but they're light for Him. Tonight we're going to see how God makes light work of things too heavy for us. Notice, first of all tonight, a serious predicament. King Ahab is dead. His son, Jehoram, is now in charge. Remember, his older brother fell out of the lattice. He reigned for a couple years, and then he died. And now the younger brother, Jehoram, is king. And the Bible tells us here about a predicament that Jehoram finds himself in. Notice the person of the predicament, first of all, in verses 1 through 3. Now Jehoram, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel and Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father and not like his mother, for he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. he departed not therefrom. We notice some things here in these introductory verses about this person who is going to put himself and others in a really bad predicament. He is the newly appointed, newly anointed king of the kingdom of Israel. And we need to be careful because during part of his reign, his counterpart in Judah has the same name. Jehoshaphat's son is going to follow him, and his name is Jehoram too. And so at some point during all this, we're going to have a king in Israel named Jehoram, and we're going to have a king in Judah whose name is Jehoram, and they're not the same guy. Okay? Actually, this Jehoram is the king of Judah's uncle. And we'll see that later on in a few chapters. But tonight I just want you to get an idea who this guy is. He is the son of Ahab and Jezebel. He is not their oldest son, as I already mentioned. He is the next oldest son. And he comes to the throne when Jehoshaphat was still reigning Judah and had done so for the last 18 years. And we are told that this Jehoram is going to reign in Israel for 12 years. And surprisingly, he actually made some good reforms. Now that's really surprising, especially when you consider his dad was Ahab and his mom was Jezebel. Now, I don't want you to get the idea he was a good person. He just wasn't as evil as his parents. But that doesn't mean he wasn't wicked. He was still wicked. Still a bad example. Still a wicked king. Still leading his people in the wrong direction. And this was the case for Jehoram because just because somebody's not as evil as Ahab and Jezebel doesn't mean they're not evil. I mean, we have people that are not as evil as Manson. But that doesn't mean they're not evil, right? Then we have not just the person of the predicament, we have the provocation of the predicament. What is going to set this path, cause this path to go down where there's going to be a predicament that's gotten into? Look at verse number 4. And Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheepmaster and rendered unto the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with the wool. Now this is going to cause the predicament. A change of kings meant a reevaluation of circumstances. Changes tend to do that in our life. A new baby. Guess what? It causes us to step back and reevaluate a lot of things in life. It causes us to step back and rearrange our priorities and what's really important. So does a new relationship, a new marriage. Here, this king of Moab finds himself in a new relationship, sort of. The king that he knew was dead. The king that he feared was dead. And his son is now ruling, and he doesn't carry quite the respect and the fear that his dad did. And what causes the reevaluation, it was heavy taxation. It seems that while Ahab was in charge, the people of Moab were basically subservient to them. And as part of that relationship, they would have to pay tribute to the Israelites every year. And it was a pretty steep tribute. 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams every year. That's a lot of expense. That's a lot of money. With the new king, the king of Moab looks at that and reevaluates that and says, I don't want to keep paying that. I'm not going to keep paying that. I did it because I feared his father, but I don't fear him. And so I'm not going to keep paying this exorbitant tribute that's been levied on me, and thus he rebelled against the king of Israel. Look at verse number 5. But it came to pass when Ahab was dead that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. We notice the prompting of the predicament. So what set all this off was Ahab's death. This verse indicates that, there was probably resentment that had built up. But it was a resentment that this king didn't feel that he could do anything about. The fact was that the catalyst to this rebellion was the death of Ahab. A change of administration is often a period of weakness in a nation. It's something even as an American, I realize that when we change administrations, even for one that I may have supported, it's a vulnerable time in our nation. And our enemies know that. We're getting people into places. We're getting our cabinet into place and our leaders. If you look back, this is one of the reasons why we were attacked on 9/11. President Bush was sworn in January of that year. And they realized now is an optimal time to attack America because they've had a change of administration and this president hasn't got his footing yet. It's a dangerous thing. It was here. Ahab's death caused this change, and it caused this king to say, I don't want to do this anymore, and so he rebelled against him. Notice the preparation for the predicament. Look at verse number 6. And King Jehoram went out of Samaria the same time and numbered all of Israel. Part of the preparation for this rebellion that he's going to try and stamp out is he's going to go out and he is going to number his troops. Well, that's a pretty wise thing to do. The numbering mentioned here, polling, is not asking for people's opinion. It's surveying, accounting, or numbering the strength of the army, and that's a wise thing to do before taking action. You want to know, how many soldiers do I have? Do I have enough soldiers to actually go against Moab and win this battle? I think in the Gospels, Jesus talked about this kind of situation. He talked about a man building a tower, and he says, hey, before you build a tower, you ought to sit down and count your funds and make sure you have enough money to finish what you start. And then he talked about a king going to war. That it's a wise thing for a king that's going to go to war to know how many troops he's got to make sure that he's got enough numbers to fight the war that he's going to start. That's what Jehoram's doing. It's actually a pretty wise battle tactic. He obviously came to the conclusion, I'm short. I don't have enough. With the troops that I have and the troops that I know Moab has, we're going to lose this battle. And so he goes and he wants to make allies with other people to go into battle with him. Look at verse number 7. And he went and sent to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, saying, the king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab to battle? He goes to Jehoshaphat and he says, look, I've got this problem. This nation that we were ruling over has rebelled against us. I'm going to go fight them, and I need help. I can't do this without you. I've numbered my troops, and that's not enough. I need you to come and assist me. And so he reaches out to Jehoshaphat. By the way, isn't it amazing how history repeats itself? Isn't this exactly what his dad did? And Jehoshaphat almost got killed agreeing to go fight with his dad against Syria. And now his son is saying, hey, would you go fight with me against Moab? And guess what? Some people never learn. And he said, I will go up, for I am as thou art. My people is thy people, and my horses is thy horses. You read that and you just shake your head and say, just some people just never get it. They just never learn. Jehoshaphat and Judah's help is going to be his first ally. But when they begin to discuss battle plans, Jehoshaphat suggests that the best way to attack Moab is going to be through the south, not through the north. And to go through the south, we're going to need to go through the land of Edom. And so if we're going to have to go through the land of Edom, we might as well get them to help us in this battle too. And so that's what they do. Look here in verse number 8. And he said, which way shall we go up? And he answered, the way through the wilderness of Edom. And the king of Israel went, and the king of Judah, and the king of Edom. And they fetched a compass of 7 days' journey, and there was no water for the host or for the cattle that followed them. So they've made all these great battle plans. Jehoram asked Jehoshaphat, he says, look, you're older, wiser, you're more battle experienced. How are we going to attack them? Which way do we go? Jehoshaphat says, let's don't go from the north, the short way. They'll be expecting that. That's exactly what they'll be expecting. Instead, we're going to go south. And by south, I mean about 100 miles. And they're going to march 100 miles with their armies in 7 days. Imagine walking 100 miles in 7 days through the wilderness, through the desert. And Jehoshaphat says, we're going to take them by surprise. But we're going to go around and down, and I guarantee you they've not fortified their defenses on the south like they have the north, because that's where they're expecting us to attack. And so this is a great battle plan. Man, they're leaning all into their brilliant war mentality and strategic planning. They even along the way pick up another ally. The king of Edom says, I'll go with you guys. I'll send my troops. And it'll be 3 against 1. And yet with all that great preparation, something was overlooked. We're going to be marching through a desert, but nobody thought about water. They brought cattle. You say, why did they bring cattle? To feed the troops. It was the food. They thought about the food. But they didn't think about what they were going to drink. And that's a pretty big oversight. You're talking about shooting yourself in the foot. That's a pretty big oversight when you're making battle plans. Is what are we going to drink? I know Gama's been deployed. I'm sure he could tell us all about battle plans. I don't know if you've ever experienced such an oversight like that. I'm sure there are oversights that happen, things that you don't think about, things that you didn't know were going to happen. But I mean, when you know you're marching along the Dead Sea, and you can't drink water from the Dead Sea, and you know you're going to be out there in the wilderness, thinking about what you're going to drink seems like it should be a pretty big thought. And yet nobody thought about it. And so they march 100 miles, 7 days journey, and they get out here, and to their surprise, there's no water. And now their cattle's going to die. And now their soldiers are going to be weak. You can make plans, but overlook important details. So what was Jehoram's response to this predicament? Now remind you, who made these decisions? Did you see one time in any of that where they consulted God? Did you see one time in any of that where they asked God, what should we do? No. It was all leaning on their own understanding, right? And they've put themselves in this really bad predicament. They don't even have probably the water and the strength to march back home. They're going to die or at least lose lots of people along the way. So they've put themselves in a really bad situation. And look at how Jehoram responds to this in verse number 10. And the king of Israel said, Alas, the Lord hath called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. His first instinct is to blame all of this on God. What are you doing to us, God? You're going to let us die out here in the wilderness. And I'm sure God's thinking, I didn't tell you to go. And I didn't tell you to go that way. And I'm not the one who forgot to think about water. The Lord didn't decide to go to war. The Lord did not make the battle plans. The Lord did not forget the water. But now Jehoram is blaming the Lord because he's thirsty. And folks, isn't that exactly what we do? We don't consider our decisions. We don't think through the decisions that we make. And when they don't turn out well because we didn't foresee some things that we should have foresaw, God must hate me. Why does God let me suffer in my life? And I'm sure God's looking at it and saying, I wasn't the one making the decisions, you were. You're the one who put yourself in this position. Problems reveal what we believe about God. Those that are quick to blame God reveal that they don't trust God. There are people, even Christians, even I at times in my life, have struggled with that mentality. Where when something goes wrong, my first instinct is to blame God for it. Or to say, or to be Charlie Brown and say, or Eeyore and say, it always goes wrong for me. Nothing ever turns out right for me. Well, nothing does turn out right for you when you make bad decisions. And that's not God's fault. This is what Jehoram's blame revealed, was that he didn't trust God, he didn't have faith in God. So they're in a serious predicament. They're going to fight a war. They've marched all this way, but they got no water. They don't even have enough resources to make it back home. Sometimes God allows us to reach a place where our human strength and understanding is exhausted so that His divine power is unmistakable, so that we can learn, hey, guess what I do need it? I'm not as wise as I thought I was. I'm not as in charge as I thought I was. When we come to the end of self, we find the beginning of faith. Are you facing a predicament right now? You got a problem that is bringing you to the end of yourself. It may or may not have been because of decisions you made. Sometimes it's just life. But you may be sitting right here tonight and you're in a predicament that is bringing you to the end of you. Let me tell you, that's where faith will begin. That's where faith's got to begin. The problem wasn't physical, really. Jehoram's statement proves that. Yeah, I know water's a physical problem, but that's not the real problem. The problem was a spiritual problem. They didn't trust God. They didn't consult God. They didn't have any desire to follow God. It wasn't just water they needed, it was a word from God that they needed. So what looked like a crisis to them, I want to say was but a light thing for him. Look with me at a spiritual prescription. It's often the case when our plans go awry, we turn to God as the last resort. If we had consulted God in the beginning, we could have avoided the problem. But we try first, and then when we fail and have no other options, then at last we turn to the Lord. This is the case for these three kings. Notice in verse number 11, the seeking for Elisha. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet here, a prophet of the Lord, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? Should have done that first, Jehoshaphat. And one of the kings of Israel's servants answered and said, here is Elisha the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. The only one of these three kings that had any love for God was Jehoshaphat. Coming to his senses, he initiates a search for a prophet, somebody to help guide them, somebody that can get a hold of God and tell them what they ought to do. It's really significant that these three kings went down to him. It's usually the course that they would send a servant and command him to come to them. The fact that they went down to him, shows just how desperate they were, how humiliated and humbled they were, that they were willing to go down to him, not wait for him to come to them. It just reminds me of the way we ought to approach God. We ought to approach God as a beggar, not a monarch. When you want something from God, don't command him. Beg. Beseech. Whatever you want to call it. Don't expect God to come to you. You go to him. God might just sit back and let you struggle. You ought to come to your senses and say, you know what? I need him. And I don't need him tomorrow, and I don't need him next week. I need him right now. And be willing to go to him. Notice the spirituality of Elisha. If we notice in those verses, the Bible says that Elisha was the one which poured water on the hands of Elijah. This is talking about his faithful servant. He was his faithful servant. He was a man of character, integrity, and faithfulness. Somebody that could be relied upon. Somebody that was dutiful and responsible. Furthermore, we're told that these kings said that the word of the Lord is with him. I don't know about you, but that's who I want to get advice from. That's who I want to get counsel from. I want to get counsel and advice from somebody I believe knows how to talk to God and has God talking to them. In other words, he was a man that was right with God, a man that could speak to God and whom God spoke to, and that's going to be essential for them to extricate themselves out of this terrible predicament that they put themselves in. Here's a verse, Galatians 6:1. Brethren, if any man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. You know, the key to that verse is ye which are spiritual. Anyone can tell you what they think you ought to do. But you need people in your life who can tell you what God wants you to do. You understand that? Let me say it again. Anybody can tell you what they think you ought to do. But you need somebody in your life that can tell you what God wants you to do. Elisha was that person. He was going to give them spiritual advice. You can get worldly advice any day, anywhere. It's easy to get. Spiritual advice is a little harder to come by. Harder than you think. You think just because they go to church, that means they're spiritual, but that's not the case. You can stand in a garage, that doesn't make you a car. Sitting in a church doesn't make somebody spiritual. Being able to quote the Bible from cover to cover doesn't make a person spiritual, because you can know the Bible but not know the God of the Bible. You need to find somebody whose life displays a vibrant relationship with God. If I want somebody to pray for me, I tell you who in this church who I know I can count on, and it's not just because she's my wife. It's because I live with her and I see the kind of Christian she is. She's the kind of Christian I one day hope to be. But I know she talks to God. I know she spends time 2 or 3 hours every morning calling out your name and praying for you. That's who I want praying for me. I want those kind of people in my life. That's who they wanted. Jehoshaphat did, at least. It was a wise decision. Notice the scorn of Elisha. Look at verse number 13. And Elisha said unto the king of Israel, what have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father and to the prophets of thy mother. Nay, for the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hands of Moab. And Elisha said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee nor see thee. Whoa, that's pretty rough. He's like, what do you want? Why don't you go ask some of your prophets? The prophets of your mom and the prophets of your dad. And then he tells him, look, if it wasn't for Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't help you at all. I'd let you suffer. Elisha rebukes the king, not privately, but in the presence of his 2 contemporaries. I'll tell you, what courage, what backbone. It's one thing to say that to a king privately, but to do that in the presence of 2 other guys who he thinks a lot about, that's pretty bold. You know, there's a lot of good men who have been compromised by the power and the pomp and the prestige of rulers. Just look at what's happening in our country. This is again why I don't want to go to Sacramento. I don't want to go to Washington and hobnob with our politicians. Politics is a dirty game. The greatest thing I can do is get on my knees and talk to an almighty God who he says the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, and he turneth it whithersoever he will. So why go to the king when I can go to the one who has his heart in his hand? There's been a lot, and I could name some names, some big names, who got a little too big for their britches and started running around with the people in power and the people in authority. And when they started doing that, they started watering down their message, started watering down the gospel. One of them is the most famous Baptist preacher in the last 100 years, and you probably can guess who I'm talking about. When he started going around hobnobbing with all these big shots, he weakened. He got a little soft. Not Elisha. Said, I don't want to help you. I don't even want to be around you. And if Jehoshaphat wasn't here, I wouldn't. I'm only going to help you for his sake. The only one that Elisha feared and respected is the only one that we should fear and respect, and that's God. Notice the solution of Elisha. Verse number 15. But now, bring me a minstrel. And it came to pass when the minstrel played that the hand of the Lord came upon him. I should try that sometime when I'm struggling with trying to get a message together for Sunday, I should call Rachel up and say, bring Denise and tell her to bring her violin. I need some inspiration. Look, you say, what is this verse about? It tells us some important things, doesn't it? It tells us the power of music. It tells me that even a godly spiritual man can have trouble controlling his spirit in the presence of evil. There was probably a little bit of righteous indignation, like Zuri. She walks around with her fists clenched. She's going to be a fighter. And I can just see Elisha standing there, and even subconsciously, the moment Jehoram comes in, the body grows tense, the fists grow clenched. And he's like, I'd love to knock his block off. What he's doing to God's people. How he's destroying God's people. And his spirit was disturbed. Your spirit will sometimes get disturbed too. And he's showing us a good remedy for that. Good music soothes a bad spirit. It's a wise thing to do. Sometimes we just need to listen to some good music. Hey, I want to, when I was struggling a year and a half ago, going through that really dark time, I want to say music was one of those things that kept me going. I don't know if it wasn't for music, I don't know what would have happened. But I had some songs by the Clark family and songs by the Collinsworth family, and I put them in a playlist, and I just play the same songs again and again and again. My wife can tell you, I'd sit there and I'd listen to them, the same song on repeat for hours. And that good music helps soothe my soul, and it will you too. That's why you need good music in your life. You need good music in your home, and I highly recommend it. That's a rabbit trail that's not even in my notes, but you got it for free. Listen, what is his remedy? And he said, thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches. For thus saith the Lord, ye shall not see wind, neither shall ye see rain. Yet that valley shall be filled with water, that ye may drink, both ye and your cattle and your beasts. This is what God's going to do. Elisha says, if you want water, dig ditches. Now, that's going to require faith. You're already thirsty. You're already hot. You already are depleted. And now Elisha is saying, you're going to have to exert yourself a little more if you want the water. The ditches have to be dug before the water will come. Delay, doubt, or delinquency is only going to serve to deny them God's blessings. Now here it is, church. Now listen to me. God's saying something to us here. There are predicaments and problems and things that we face in life that are too big for us, that are not too big for Him. But God's not going to bless us, and God's not going to move till we get our shovels out and start digging ditches. Now, I'm not talking about you, Miss Catherine, but there are people that I have met who complain, I want a job, and they're just sitting around waiting for the job to fall out of the sky. Get your shovel out and get on the internet and dig some ditches and put in some resumes. Go the old school way, maybe. Go around and visit personally and say, I need a job. I don't know what your predicament is, but I know God may be waiting until you get your shovel out and start digging the ditch before He helps you with that problem. I love that verse, and I quote it to my sons all the time. Because they want to get married, they want to find someone. And I remind them all the time, you won't find somebody in your room. She's not there. I love that statement of Eliezer. I don't have the chapter. This is all just coming fresh. But Eliezer, Abraham's servant, when he was sent to find a bride for Isaac, and he went to where Abraham told him, and he's like, how in the world am I going to find a bride down here? And he asked God to do something specific. And here's what Eliezer said in response to what God did. I, being in the way, the Lord led me. You know what he's saying? God's not going to lead you until you start moving. God's not going to work until you start doing what you can. God's not going to fill your ditches until you get out the shovel and dig them. Notice that if they want water, they must dig the ditches, and we want blessings sometimes without the effort, but God often requires us to do our part before He'll do anything. And notice, the blessing of the solution was contingent upon their diligence to the solution. You say, what do you mean by that? You only dig one ditch, you're only getting a little bit of water. The level of their blessing is going to be contingent on the diligence. Elisha said, fill this valley full of ditches. Don't be like Peter. When the Lord got in his boat and they had been fishing all night and not caught any fishes, and the Lord told Peter, let down your nets, read it in Luke 5, let down your nets for a draught of fishes, for a big catch. And Peter protested, Lord, we've been out here all night. I'm a fisherman by trade. Nevertheless, just to appease you, I'll let down one net. Notice, you read it. It's there. And that net break. And it didn't have to, because if he had obeyed God, they'd have had nets full instead of one net full. The level of your blessing is going to be contingent on the level of your response to God's commands. One ditch is going to get you a little water. Greater obedience is greater blessing. Faith doesn't wait for God to send water before digging the ditches. A farmer who says, I'll wait till it rains until I plow and then plow, will never have a harvest. Because preparation always comes before provision. God sends rain to prepared ground, not unprepared ground. Now, some people are asking God for provision, but haven't yet prepared. Asking for growth when you haven't dug a ditch. Asking for blessing when you haven't dug the ditch of obedience. And here's where we find that great statement from Elisha in verse number 18. And this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord. They're going to dig a valley full of ditches. And God says, there's not going to be any clouds. There's not going to be any rain. And yet tomorrow morning when you get up, those ditches are going to be filled with water. I would say that's a pretty amazing thing. And Elisha says, this is easy peasy for the Lord. This is easy stuff. This is but a light thing for God. Christian, when are we going to realize that the problems we so struggle with are so light for Him? and stop struggling with them and turn them to Him. Turn them over to Him and turn to Him and let Him deliver us. What is beyond us is not beyond God. What is too heavy for us is but a light thing for God. And I wonder tonight what you're struggling with. Because God says, it's but a light thing for me. Notice lastly, a supernatural provision. God's going to deliver them in a couple different ways. Notice the delivery of water in verse number 20. Verse number 19, and ye shall smite every fenced city and every choice city, and shall fell every good tree, and stop all the wells of water, and mar every good piece of land with stones. And it came to pass in the morning, when the meat offering was offered, that behold, there came water by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. We're not told how this water came, only that it came. These ditches suddenly were filled with water. I'll tell you what, I don't know how many days or how long they went without water, but what a relief. What a blessing. This is what obedience will bring to our lives. When God says dig, don't question, just grab a shovel. Little did they realize. I mean, they just thought this water was one blessing. They didn't realize it was going to provide another. But that's just how God operates. Notice what God did in verse number 21. And when all the Moabites heard that the kings were come up to fight against him, they gathered all that were able to put to armor and upward and stood in the border. And they rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water. And the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood, and they said, this is the blood of the kings, and this is blood. The kings are surely slain, and they have smitten one another. Therefore, Moab to the spoil. So here's what happened. The Moabites hear that these three armies are out there, and they're ready to fight. So they gird up. They're ready. Let's go. They walk out to the edge of the battlefield. They're looking down from that mountainside that they're on. And as they look down over that valley, they see something shimmering, something shiny, but yet it's red. And they assume it's blood. And here's what they think happened. They think these three allies got out there and got into a squabble with one another and started turning on each other and got into a fight and have killed each other. That's what they think has happened. And so they say, hey, let's go down and let's get what they left. Let's get their spoil. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Verse number 24, and when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up. See, those ditches provided trench warfare. They couldn't see all the soldiers down in those ditches. And so when they get down there, to their surprise, the valley's not empty. It's full of soldiers. And they rose up and smote the Moabites so that they fled before them. But they went forward, smiting the Moabites, even into their country, and they beat down the cities, and every good piece of land cast every man his stone, and filled it, and they stopped all the wells of water, and felled all the good trees. Only in Kirahasheth left they stones thereof, howbeit the slingers went about and smote it. And when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men that drew swords to break through, even unto the king of Edom, but they could not. The same water that delivered them from thirst is now delivering them from the threat. And that's just how God works. The king of Moab makes one last effort. It's kind of like the Battle of the Bulge. He looks and surveys and finds what he thinks is the weakest point, and he throws all his resources in at that weakest point, trying to break through the line and hopefully either escape or circle back around and capture them in between his forces. But he doesn't work. They're defeated just like Elisha had prophesied. Then this chapter kind of finishes on a weird note. We see lastly not just the delivery from of the water and the deliverance from war in the war, but we see the depravity that was witnessed. So when the king of Moab sees, I'm defeated, I'm done, the Bible says, then he took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. Let me tell you, the devil's cruel, and those that follow him are cruel. Our world is a cruel place. A world without God is a vicious place. I look at that and wonder, how could a man do this to his own son? How do moms every day kill the baby inside of them? You say, how does it happen? Bad theology is how. When people who caused the rebellion blames the one, notice at the end here, people who caused the rebellion blame the ones that they rebelled against. And there was great indignation against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land. They're like really upset at Israel, but they're the ones who rebelled. They're the ones who started this. God will deliver in His time and His way. Water and victory were but a light thing for God. I wonder tonight what valley you're standing in. A dry marriage, a struggling ministry, a weary soul, an impossible situation. Maybe it's a predicament of your own making. You can be sitting here tonight and it feels overwhelming. But to God, it's but a light thing. Don't miss this. God's power is not released where there is passivity. It is revealed where there is obedient faith. So here's the question. Are you digging the ditches in your life? Are you putting in the effort so God can bless you? Because what's heavy to you and what's impossible to you, it's just light for Him. So grab a shovel, start digging. Our heads bowed, our eyes closed. Don's going to come to the piano tonight. Would you be here tonight?